Some books tell a great story, and then there are books that change everything. What if I told you that one book didn't just entertain people with a story about time travel, it actually invented the very idea for the modern world? It gave us the words, the images, and a truly terrifying vision of the future that would shape literature for 100 years.
Yeah, that's right. The actual phrase, time machine, it just didn't exist before H.G. Wells wrote it down. Back in 1895, this guy wasn't just telling a story. He created a concept so powerful that, today, we all know exactly what it means. He's the pioneer who literally wrote the book on time travel.
But here's the thing. This story is so much more than just a sci-fi adventure. It's a dark mirror. Wells sent his hero hurtling into the future, but what he found there was a horrifying critique of the very world he just left behind.
All right, so let's get into this. In this explainer, we're going to journey from the invention of the time machine itself to the absolutely shocking future it reveals. Then, we'll kind of zoom out. We'll connect that future to the nightmare of Wells' present, dig into the scientific warnings he hid in the story, look at his own changing ideas, and finally see how this one book gave birth to an entire genre.
Okay, so picture this. It's late Victorian England, a time of incredible progress, sure, but also staggering inequality. And right in the middle of all this, a young writer named H.G. Wells is about to change science fiction forever.
And this thing was a hit right from the get-go. It was first published in installments in a magazine, and get this, it has never been out of print since 1895. It's the story that made the idea of a physical machine for time travel famous, and it's also seen as one of the first dying Earth stories ever. I mean, he basically laid the groundwork for so much.
So let's get into the story itself. The main character, who we only know as the time traveler, builds his machine and launches himself forward, not just a few decades, but hundreds of thousands of years, and he lands in what, at first, seems like a total paradise, a perfect garden world.
Just think about that number for a second. 802,701 AD. It's an almost impossibly huge leap. Wells chose that massive span of time for a reason, to show the full, terrifying potential of what humanity could become given nearly 1 million years.
And the world he finds is beautiful. It's lush, it's green, filled with these grand, decaying buildings. It looks like humanity has finally conquered disease, struggle, and hard work. But as the time traveler explores, this deep sense of unease starts to creep in. The beautiful people he meets are, well, they're simple, they're easily frightened, and they have this primal, overwhelming fear of the dark.
And this is where we get the horrifying reveal. Humanity has split into two totally separate species. Above ground, you have the Eloi. They're small, beautiful, almost childlike. They're the descendants of the old, wealthy upper class. And then, below ground in the darkness, live the Morlocks, ape-like, cannibalistic creatures who are the descendants of the industrial working class. The social divide of Wells's time has become biological.
The awful truth the time traveler eventually figures out is that the Eloi's paradise isn't a paradise, it's a farm. The Morlocks, down in their underground machine world, they raise the helpless Eloi on the surface only to come up at night and hunt them for food. The former masters have literally become the livestock.
So you have to ask yourself, where did a nightmare like this even come from? Well, it wasn't just some fantasy. Wells is holding up a very dark mirror to the injustices of his own time. The future he invented was a direct warning about his present.
And the connection is chillingly direct. Let's break it down. Step 1, you have the massive class divide in Victorian England, the rich living lives of leisure, and the working class just grinding away in factories and mines. Step 2, you have Wells's own life. As a poor young apprentice, he spent years of his life working in dark, miserable underground basements. And step 3 is the result. The Eloi and the Morlocks. They are the evolutionary endpoint of that exact split. He wasn't just imagining it, he was projecting from the world he knew.
But Wells was more than just a social commentator. He was a student of biology and physics. And the time machine wasn't just a critique of class, it was a direct challenge to the biggest scientific ideas of the 19th century.
So back then, the Victorians were obsessed with this idea of progress. They thought evolution was a one-way street, always going up. But Wells, who actually studied under the famous biologist T.H. Huxley, he asked a pretty radical question. What if evolution could go backwards?
He argued that by getting rid of all struggle, all hardship, the upper classes would just degenerate, becoming the weak, simple Eloi. This idea of devolution was a huge slap in the face to Victorian optimism. And he didn't stop there. After he escapes the Morlocks, the time traveler jumps millions of years even further into the future, to the very end of the Earth. And what he finds is a world dictated by the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. It's a cold, dying planet under a giant, bloated red sun, with the universe's energy just slowly fading away. He based his ultimate vision of doom on the cutting-edge physics of his day.
So you hear all this and you'd think Wells was just a complete pessimist, right? Well, it's a little more complicated than that. The truth is, his views on the future actually changed a lot over the course of his life.
It's really easy to just label him as the guy who dreamed up humanity's doom and gloom. But the reality is, Wells's vision wasn't static. It evolved right along with his own life.
See, early in his career, when he was poor and struggling with his health, yeah, his books were dark, they were dystopian. But then he got famous, he became successful, and his perspective started to shift. He started writing more optimistic books, like A Modern Utopia. He began to think that maybe, if the right people, a scientific elite he called the samurai, were in charge, technology could be managed to build a better world, instead of just leading to our doom. That tension between dystopia and a planned utopia really defined his whole career.
Okay, let's do our final zoom out, because the legacy of this short book is, well, it's absolutely monumental. It is truly hard to overstate its impact on the literature that would define the entire 20th century.
You have to understand, Wells didn't just write a book. He gave future writers a blueprint. He basically created the modern dystopian genre, giving authors a whole new framework for exploring the dark side of progress, technology, and society.
I mean, you can draw a straight line from Wells to the giants of the genre. Think about the rigid class system of Brave New World, or the oppressive government in 1984. The DNA of the time machine is all over them. It's the foundation that all these later masterpieces were built on.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Listen to what George Orwell, yeah, that George Orwell, wrote about Wells in 1941. He said, "Thinking people who were born about the beginning of this century are in some sense Wells's own creation. The physical world would be perceptibly different if Wells never existed." That is a staggering thing to say. Orwell is arguing that Wells didn't just influence other writers, he shaped the way an entire generation thought.
And that brings us to our final, lingering question. A question that echoes all the way from 1895 to right now. If H.G. Wells could fire up his machine and visit our world with our technology, our society, our deep divisions, what would he think? Would he see the promise of a utopia being built, or would he see the terrifying familiar beginnings of the Eloi and the Morlocks?